Thank you for staying with us. Christmas is known to be a time of joy, love, and happiness in many households. But this year, many families experienced loss and sadness. Africa's most populous nation has witnessed a series of food-related stampedes in recent times, with Ibadan, Anambra, and Abuja being the latest, claiming the lives of at least 50 people. The stampedes resulted from struggles to obtain food, cash, and clothing from organizers of charity events and Christmas funfairs as Nigeria grapples with the worst cost of living crisis in a generation. Nigeria's inflation rate rose to 34.6% in November 2024, up from 33.88% in October, driven by high food costs, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS. This month. While these tragic events have been reported, how many more have happened that went unnoticed? How can the government and individuals address this issue and prevent further deaths? Joining us from our Abuja studio is the Assistant Comptroller General of Immigration, Migration, Movement, and Border Security expert. He is also the former head of Media and Publicity in Nigeria Immigration Service, ACG James Sunday, retired. Good morning, compliments of the season, and thank you for joining us.
Very good morning.
Now, these are very sad issues that we have to talk about at a time like this, stampedes, where a number of persons, according to a report, over 50 persons were said to have died. I am wondering, from your perspective as an expert, what you think went wrong with these issues even happening in the first place?
We must understand the issue that has to do with crowd management and control with respect to stampede. It is not a new development in the year 2024 because there was this same experience in Bauchi, in Lagos, and Sokoto, sometimes in the year before we now had the experience in Ibadan, Anambra, and Abuja. But the bottom line has to do with not demonizing poverty or hunger, and also not indicting people with goodwill and good-spirited individuals who, for want of doing good to people, now became victims of circumstance. We must also not look at our citizens as being impoverished or poor, and then for that reason, we now look at it as hunger being the main reason for what happened. I would rather look at it from a faulty control and management of the crowd issue. Why am I choosing this as my own point of takeoff? Without proper plan and organization, you cannot have effective crowd control and management. And without effective crowd control and management, you cannot have a very successful gathering of people for whatever purpose, and then a very peaceful dispersion of the people. It is not only during sharing of palliative or distribution of food that people gather as a crowd, because the word crowd has to do with a large number of people gathered at a location or spot for a purpose. Then we have to now query what is the purpose for the gathering of the crowd. And then who are the managers involved in controlling and managing this crowd? Because there are two issues involved now. Crowd control, which has to do with emplacing all the control measures. It's just like having a vehicle. The control for the vehicle is the steering. Then the management is the driver. And in this case, we have the organizers as the driver. So the two must work together for a very successful distribution of whatever or gathering. Because when we talk of crowd management and control, it has to do with a large number of people gathered for a certain purpose, not necessarily for palliative. It could be for festivity. It could be for musical concerts. Sometimes even pilgrimages in Holy Land, you hear of stampedes. But the bottom line is we must have proper planning and organization, which now leads to effective control and management.
Right. You've mentioned major issues, but it's also important for us to also look at the socioeconomic aspect of this, which is poverty. You mentioned quality control, which is, of course, very necessary. And some will also react to that, saying that perhaps a swift emergency response at that time would have been able to, manage the situation. Looking at the number of casualties and the population that we're seeing, we had more of women and children. So talking about this, how should we, manage the situation ahead of future occurrences? Because one would expect that after what happened in Ibadan, it should not have happened in Abuja also, and also happened in Okija. It should not have happened. Who should be held accountable, and how do we stop incidences like this immediately?
Just like I mentioned earlier on, before people will gather in a place, there must be a notice, there must be an information, there must be a broadcast. So somebody must have given out the information. And the person that must have given out the information must be the organizer. So number one person that needs to get proper orientation is any person or group of individuals that are willing to invite people for anything, not necessarily palliative, whether religious procession, religious gathering, social gathering like musical concerts, festivity, carnivals, even sports. And sometimes even people that are invited for job placement. These are all areas where you have thousands of people gathering. And by the time you have thousands of people gathering at a spot, it's already a crowd. So when you have a crowd, you have rowdiness. And the only thing that solves the problem of rowdiness is the control. So from the word crowd, when you remove the word C, which is the control, you are left with rowdiness. So the major aspect is there must be a law put in place, either by government because of this development, apart from the constitutional provision that allows right of gathering. There must be a law in place that guides every form of gathering that is beyond the control of normal human beings. They must involve relevant security agencies that are supposed to be on the ground to assist. Agencies like the Nigerian Police Force and Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps. These are agencies that have purview over control of life and property and civil individuals. So once there's relevant law that has to do with, before you invite so number of people, you must seek permission. Definitely, there must be deployment, and after deployment, there must be clearance to know whether the organizers have planned properly and they are organized. If all these things are put in place, definitely there will be effective control. And what is the area of effective control? The officials that are likely to be deployed must have suggested to the organizers what to put in place. Things like having barriers, things like timing, things like tagging, things like giving numbers, even issues that borders on when the crowd are there. You try to make them to be organized by sitting them down and getting them composed. Because when people are standing, there's tendency for push And you know the vulnerable groups that we mentioned, the women with baby in their hand, or maybe some of them pregnant, underage children, the sick, the weak, the physically challenged. These are a group of vulnerable groups that needs to be monitored. They must be separated from those that are strong. So the officials that are going to be on the ground must of necessity be able to carry out the job of sieving between the strong and the weak, the men and the women, the elderly and the young ones, so that when it's time for people to move in and they are given numbers, they move in based on the numbering or based on tagging, or even the organizers breaking it down into number of days. Pick the first 100, let them come on day 1. The second 100, let them come on day 2. Of recent, in Canada, there was distribution of palliative. 1,000 households were said to be invited. 15,000 turned up. But because there were good crowd control managers, they were able to give only 2,000, and they were able to disperse the remaining 30,000 without any crisis. These are not issues that, it's not a rocket science. It's an issue that has to do with public safety and security. And our security agencies are trained on how to control crowd and manage it.
Right.
We can even see from example of events like the Holy Ghost Conference in Redeem and the Shiloh in Kenaland. Because of effective crowd control and management, good planning and organization, every member that comes in passes through a specific route. They get seated, not standing, and then when it's time for anybody to do anything, it is orderly. So the bottom line is orderliness. Once there is law, there is orderliness. Even in the religious setup, it's because of this orderliness that people can go in, take their seat, listen to the sermon, and then disperse without any crisis. So we must put in orderliness while enforcing the law.
If you can hear me. I like the fact that you brought up these examples, especially that of Canada, where over 15,000 persons, I think, came out as against the original plan of 1,000 persons. Well, there are those who will tell you that for the matters of redemption camp and that of Shiloh, palliatives or food items are not being shared, so people know what they are going there for, and so there is no rush to say, I need to get mine before it's finished, so to speak. So my aspect, or the question I want to ask, has to do with the matter of mindset. This scarcity mindset, if it plays a major role in how people approach things in this part of the world. We saw what happened in Canada. There was nothing like there was a rush, but the stories and the narrative we hear around the stampedes that we have witnessed in recent times in Nigeria is the fact that some of these people come way ahead of the time. Some persons were said to have been there at the centers earlier, maybe 3 a.m. or 5 a.m., so they can be there in time. And then there were stories about some other persons, throwing in their babies. We do not know how true that is. Is the mindset, our mindset, does it play a major role here? The scarcity mindset, thinking that we need to rush to get these things, and that is why we are not, conducting ourselves in an orderly manner, even where the organizers may have planned.
The mindset issue for me has to do with individual, the kind of priority they give to whatever situation, and the discipline that individuals, that's personal, they are self-discipline. You see, as much as we know that the other aspect that I mentioned has nothing to do with food and palliative, it's also crowd. But when we are talking about food and palliative distribution, the organizers must know that they are inviting people, and even those that they did not invite will come. It's a natural thing in developing nations. The advanced nation, the underdeveloped nations, The advanced nations and developed nations already know that when you are invited to a place, because of personal dignity, that is the area where the National Orientation Agency will need to speak out to the public. Now there is a national issue. There's a role for the National Orientation Agency to sensitize Nigerians on the need to have personal dignity, to have priority and discipline when it has to do with anything distribution, not necessarily food, even job placement, going to the stadium to watch sport, going for concert, because these are areas that we must talk about when we are talking about crowd. So we should not just limit, because when we limit it to the issue of palliative alone, we are not doing justice to crowd management and control. So we must be holistic, so that when people are handling this issue, they handle it from a holistic point of view and not just limiting it to certain areas. And that's why these machineries that I mentioned earlier must be there. The organizers must work hand in hand with operatives that are going to be deployed, because they are, for a very, very good reason, there must be need to involve operatives, either from the Nigerian Police Force or from the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps, who have purview over civil matters. If they are involved, there are certain machineries that need to be put in place, like the barriers, ropes, sometimes handheld control, and even the mere appearance of this individual in the environment also has a way of curtailing rush. So, forgetting about the fact that it has to do with food, our integrity as individuals, our perspective about life, because it is only a living person that can eat food. So there must be proper orientation on how people should conduct themselves when they are going for anything whatsoever it is. It's a way of educating and enlightening our public on the need for them to know how to be orderly and organized. Even in filling stations, sometimes you can see the kind of scrambled apples. On the road, you see how people overtake people anyhow. So these are not issues that has to be limited to only food. It has to do with attitude. So orientation on attitude, on how to be orderly, is very, very important when we are considering issue of crowd control. Because if you look at yourself and myself, we are not praying that any one of us should have any reason to go and look for food. But you cannot rush and go and be looking for food the way these other people who are not enlightened are doing. So for me, 100% we have to divide into two. 50% of the blame goes to those who are invited, and 50% of the blame goes to those who are organizing the event, because without proper planning and organization, there cannot be effective crowd control and management. And when there's no effective crowd control and management, there can be peaceful gathering and safe disperse. Because unless people gather peacefully, they cannot disperse. There will always be this unnecessary crush, this unnecessary stampede, which is avoidable. So we must look at the bottom line, which has to do with the silent issue, and the silent issue has to do with control and management. Once there's effective control and management, every other issue that has to do with hunger or whatever it is will be addressed. Because there is nothing that stops any individual to be disciplined just because you want to collect food. No. In fact, it's even an act of indiscipline for you to want to rush in the first instance. It's an act of indiscipline. So we must return back to the discipline era of knowing what to do part-time.
And you know, while we acknowledge the role of the individual in this, some would also say perhaps enlightenment and all of that may not really, come up in the situation where someone is hungry and needs to eat. Looking at Nigeria's inflation rate, which has risen to about 34.6%, there are prospects for 2025, positive prospects, and we've also heard other figures from other experts. But let's talk about our emergency response. You've talked about the presence of security agencies, the government working hand in hand with, private individuals and all of that to ensure that, there is a level of safety and calm where palliatives are being distributed. But how well are we faring in terms of emergency response? Not just in cases of stampedes, building collapse, fire incidences. How well have we been faring? How prepared are security agencies to handle this? Because we saw some reports where they said some of those persons were on the ground for hours and could have been rescued if there were security agencies on ground at that time to manage the situation.
Just like I said earlier on, if you did not invite security agencies officially, they cannot just poke nose into your affairs. And that's why I said, number one, there must be a law to guide issue of crowd gathering. Because if we are talking of stampede cannot happen between 2, 3, 4, 5 people. It's normally when there's massive gathering. And that's where the issue of law comes up. And once there's a law put in place, and then the security agencies that are supposed to be responsible are involved, definitely, whoever is organizing anything must seek for permission. After which a permission is given, and then once approval is given, the agencies, the security operatives are on the ground. We don't pray for any untoward happening or any mishap. They should be able to do whatever. But when they are not invited, they cannot just surface from nowhere. Because most times, we are very wary of seeing security operatives around us. The next thing they'll say they're harassing. But when it is based on invitation, and everyone knows that this set of individuals are supposed to be on the ground, there would be calmness, and everybody will be orderly. So we must, of necessity, understand the fact that the presence of our security agencies, particularly those who have the purview, like the civil defense and the police, is because of public security and safety. And this issue of crowd control has to do with public safety and security. So we must place a civil relationship with operatives in the area of understanding that whenever we see operatives around, there must be a purpose for their being there. And particularly with this development, once there is a law that has to do with gathering of crowd and then permission, definitely, with the presence of security agencies, if there's any development, they will know what next to do.
Well, there are those who would say that we already have laws with regards to crowd control, checking up event centers. There are licenses that you have to obtain for local government areas. I know Lagos State has one where you have to obtain certain permits, and then they come and, examine the venue you want to use and look at what you put in place to ensure the safety of the crowd, and that everything that you intend to do is put in place. So there are laws already. There are people you have to bring in. If you need even those who control the traffic because of the inflow of persons to that area, you need to liaise as an organizer with these persons. But as it is, it's looking like not enough is being done with regards to the use of these laws, the enforcement of these laws. So do we need more laws with regards to this, or the enforcement from your perspective?
You just mentioned Lagos now. It's an exception. I'm talking about having it all over. That this same law that is making things to happen in Lagos is applicable to other states, so that there's no state that's an isolation. I'm not entirely saying there's no law, but what I'm saying, there must be a national understanding that there is a law that has to do with mass gathering of people, because it has to do with lives of people. It has to do with public safety and security. That is my concern. Apart from that, there is nothing that makes people not to be orderly and organized, particularly when you are invited to an environment. Because number one, it will be riotous for people to gather, and the next thing they are making noise or they are struggling, trampling on each other. It is riotous in nature. But when there's organization based on a provision that is on the ground, and then there is presence of operatives that are supposed to enforce certain law, either controlling of traffic or the controlling of the crowd, definitely you must get the needed result. But void of that, we will keep coming on television house to be talking about the same thing over and over. And public enlightenment and education is very, very essential, because you cannot deprive people of knowledge and expect them to do the right thing. So let there be the knowledge factor first. If people now refuse to heed, then there could be now a sanction. Because as far as I'm concerned, every person needs to be told what to do part-time. Like when you are driving, road safety will tell you, you must put on
but they say experience is the greatest teacher. And after what happened in Ibadan one would expect that that experience would have taught every other person who is looking to go collect palliative a lesson to know how to conduct themselves. But that didn't happen. Do you think that it's all about enlightening people as it is, even when experience is not teaching people well enough?
I want to bring your knowledge to what that enlightenment and education is continuous. Are there not individuals that are into drugs, and then there's advertisement that certain drugs or certain substances have this effect on human body, and yet they continue? So you cannot say because some people refuse to heed instruction, then the right thing is not being done. No. It's not left for individuals who know that this is wrong to stop doing it. The major thing that happens is not as if the operatives are not ready to do their job. Are the citizens also ready to abide by the law? Because even the operatives may end up being victims if there's no proper enlightenment, because they could also be trampled upon. So the fact remains that there must be proper understanding on the level of knowledge of the fact that certain things are wrong when it's done at a specific time on a place. But that we are not going to encourage education or enlightenment is like saying we will stop preaching people to people who are taking drugs that they should stop taking drugs out, or maybe those who are doing some other criminal activities that they should not stop. No. This must continue. The enlightenment must continue, the law must continue in its own role, and the operatives must continue on their own duty. While the citizens must be responsible and give priority to whatever they are doing. Because just like I said earlier on, it's only when you have life that you can eat the food. So we must prioritize our enlightenment program and education to make sure that our citizens get to know exactly what's expected of them when they get to certain places. And that is why you see in some advanced clients, even travel advisory is always a simple thing for them. They give their citizens travel advisory on certain area not to go to, an area to go to. So the same thing can happen to anything that we're doing. We must be able to tell our citizens what to do part-time. Even in this area of rescue, our citizens are supposed to know the first aid, the first line of action to take when somebody collapses, and how to resuscitate the person. These are all areas that are very, very important. It's cut across both our security operatives and then the civilian populace. So we must obviously do so many things online. Putting proper control and management in place, enlightenment, paramedics, activity, and every other aspect that will keep the environment safe for this crowd of people that are gathered, for us to have a very safe gathering and a very safe disperse, just like I gave you the Canada experience.
All right, we'll have to leave the conversation here now. ACG James Sunday, retired Assistant Comptroller General of Immigration, Migration Management and Border Security expert, former head of Media and Publicity, Nigeria Immigration Service. Thank you so much for your time on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.